Let's talk about some of the criticisms of supply side economics. So the main idea of supply side economics is a cut in income tax would provide more incentive for workers to work harder and work for more hours, and that would shift the aggregate supply to the right. Okay. However, there's several criticisms to this idea. First, it underestimates the impact of on the aggregate demand. When you cut taxes, there are two things that happens. You cut taxes, we know that the aggregate demand is going to shift right or go up, and the aggregate supply shifts to the right again, and it goes up. So this is the main contention of the supply side economics, that when you cut taxes, it provides more incentive for the workers to work for more hours, and hence the supply would go up. Okay, so aggregate supply shifts to the right, and you expect the GDP to go up and the price level to go down. That's the main idea of supply side economics. However, when you cut taxes, you're providing more money in the hands of the consumers. When you put more money in the hands of the consumers, they're going to spend more money. When they spend more money, the demand is higher. So a cut in taxes not only leads to a shift of the aggregate supply to the right, but also the shift of aggregate demand to the right. And to the extent the aggregate demand shifts to the right, the main contention of aggregate supply shifting to the right, or the supply side economics, goes down. So let's shift the aggregate demand to the right. If we shift the aggregate demand to the right till this extent, the GDP goes up. So there is no problem as far as, or no argument as far as what happens to GDP. The GDP goes up and the jobs are higher. But the main idea of supply side economics is that, look, not only the GDP goes up, but the price goes down. But when we account for the fact that the aggregate demand shifts to the right, the price level will go up. And if you allow the shift of the aggregate demand curve enough to so much extent, the price level would in fact rise rather than go down. So the supply side economics believe that the price level will be P1, but they do not they underestimate the impact on aggregate demand. When you account for the impact of aggregate demand, the price level would in fact possibly shift up or the go up rather than going down. And this undermines the main idea of supply side economics. The second problem is it is not exactly clear as to what happens first, meaning that yes, the aggregate supply shifts to the right and aggregate demand shifts to the right as well. But is it the case that when you cut taxes, the aggregate demand shifts to the right first, or is it the case that the aggregate supply shifts to the right first? It has been found that typically the supply effects happen over a long period of time, and the demand effects happen much more faster or much more earlier. So, and there is a problem as if this is true, meaning if you cut taxes and aggregate demand shifts to the right first, then the economy would witness higher levels of prices. More jobs is fine, but higher level of prices is what the economy will witness first. So when you cut taxes, the demand effect happens to be much more faster and much more immediate, and hence the price level will go up, which beats the main contention of the supply side economics. The third criticism is it is difficult to estimate exactly what is the relationship between a cut in taxes and incentive to work. Remember, we are talking of incentive to work, and there is no particular way in which you can measure the incentive to work. So there is high degree of uncertainty about the relationship between the tax cuts and the incentive to work. So there is no neat way to measure that if I cut taxes by 5%, how much is the change in incentive, because you cannot clearly quantify the incentive. The fourth criticism comes from the idea of Laffer curve, and the criticism being that when you cut taxes, the supply side policymakers believe that the tax revenue goes up. But in fact, when you look at the actual data in Reagan period in the 80s, a cut in tax rate lead to a drop in tax revenue, and the tax revenue in fact decrease. So here's our Laffer curve, a little T on the horizontal axis, the tax rate, and the tax revenue, the total amount of tax collected by the government on the vertical axis. And we have a Laffer curve which appears to be like this. Right. So the point is, if you are standing at this point and we are, and if we cut income tax rate, the tax revenue will actually fall. The main premise for the tax for the supply side economics is to work is that we have to be somewhere over in this region where when we cut taxes, the tax revenue in fact would go up. But that is not factually true. US and many other industrial countries are typically in the lower tax bracket, and hence when we cut taxes in these countries or in these economies, uh, uh, the tax revenue would in fact go down instead of going up. So the fifth criticism is that it has limited effect on inflation. And this goes back to the same idea that if we ignore the aggregate demand effect, then only the supply side policies will work, which is the idea that if I shift the supply curve to the left, the prices will go down, right? So you move from this point to this point. However, if you account for the fact that you have demand side effects happening as well, and you suppose increase the aggregate demand to this extent and the aggregate demand goes up, then the drop in price, that is the main contention of the supply side economics, is no longer left when we account for the fact that when we account for the fact that the demand will have an impact on the economy through the cutting taxes. So the supply side policymakers underestimated the effect of the cutting taxes on inflation. It is not necessary that inflation will go down, or in fact, it might go up, and definitely the effect on inflation is limited because there will be the impact on the demand through the cutting taxes.